Guys, I'm gonna be honest with you, I was not planning to make this video until someone in my Discord showed me this build and I realized that I did not have a choice. There was literally no way that I could not talk about this because it is one of the craziest things I have ever seen and also one of the more unique builds that I will probably ever showcase. So today we are on Nova. I've talked about Nova a lot since her rework. I made a big video on her a couple of months ago, and she has been, ever since then, and she was even beforehand, just a really good frame. But what is going on today that makes me title this video, well, you know, that? It is perhaps one of the coolest interactions I have ever seen between Araxia's new melee, the Spinarex, and the Elemental Ward ability off of Chroma, which doesn't even fit on the ability screen, and Molecular Prime. So what is Elemental Ward? Well, before DE figured out that they could, just make an ability that swaps if you like tap and then if you hold down to cast, they created Elemental Ward on Chroma, which has 4 different variants, that being Heat, Electric, Toxin, and Cold, all of which can be chosen by changing your first emissive color. For the purposes of today's build, we are using the Cold, so make sure your first emissive color is set to white. But Cold Elemental Ward does not many things. It gives you armor, which is fine. Nova's not a bad health tank, but that is not what we really care about here. What's more important here is that when enemies damage you while this is active, and I will just have these be some low level people, you can see how they're getting procced with cold and taking damage. That's because their shots get reflected right back at them, which is interesting. But the thing is that once you get to high levels, this doesn't really do anything because enemies deal so little damage compared to the HP that they actually have that it just becomes useless. What is very unique about this ability though is that the reflected damage is actually coded as melee damage, and this allows it to benefit from a lot of things that you would otherwise not expect it to benefit from, namely melee passives and melee influence. Yes, this ability can benefit from melee influence, which means that if I bring myself a Diriga with the, what's it called? Electropulse Precept, which can activate influence back on these enemies, I trigger influence, just give the homeboy a second. There we go. If I activate Cold Elemental Ward now, boom, they are all taking cold damage and cold procs because the status is being spread and just how melee influence functions in the back end. But yeah, this is really good for crowd control, but that's not what we're using it for. Because it inherits the effects of melees, the Spinarex is going to be used today because it has the unique trait where on death, enemies have a 10% chance to burst for each stack of toxin status applied to them, which will spread toxin damage. And this is so absurdly broken because when enemies have toxin on them and they die, they will create a cascading chain that will eventually kill entire tile sets. And the opposite of many builds in this game, or at least many things you might see from other YouTubers, is that they are what people call simulacrum stompers, where they look insane in the simulacrum, and they don't really reflect that well when you get into actual gameplay. But, well, just watch this. So yeah, this setup, when you're actually playing, cooks. Like it cooks. There's nothing else to really even say about it. You barely even need to play the game, so much so to the point where you can kind of just stand there and everything will die. And it is absurdly strong. It speaks for itself. I'm not even sure if I have the actual explanation of what's going on here correct because it is really confusing. Molecular Prime is a very important piece of this puzzle though. You can use it to either slow down or speed up enemies. We're going to be using it to speed them up just because it makes them move faster, and it also applies a 100% damage vulnerability. Double damage is always very nice, but importantly here, when enemies die, there will be an explosion, and that explosion will inherit the class of weapon and any effects that it might have for it, which means that getting a kill with our Spinarex will cause an explosion from Molecular Prime that will treat it as though it was Spinarex damage. And this obviously works with the unique trait here, but it also does inherit melee influence, which is just broken. And seeing as Molecular Prime deals blast damage, that will actually allow this ability to trigger the blast status, which is just absurd. The spaghetti code here is insane, but all of this basically means is that you cast Elemental Ward, cast Molecular Prime, just melee some people, and everything will die. Here's what I'm using on these Spinarex. It is a pretty simple build. Just throw Primed Reach over here. Otherwise, we're just running it with pure Toxin to scale the Toxin dots off of the passive. The way we trigger influence is through a Doriga with this build because the Electro Pulse precept can hit enemies and trigger influence. Don't ask me why, but it does. And then here's what we use over on Nova. This is a pretty simple build that is made to be super easy survivability with Arcane Aegis, Brief Respite, and Fast Deflection. Molecular Prime has a massive explosion radius of 25 meters with this build. We also have a permanent 90% DR from Molecular Fission combining with Null Star, and her passive obviously gives us the energy management of dropping energy orbs when enemies are sped up. Any health orbs we do get too can be converted by Equilibrium. So the build is super comfortable, she doesn't die, and her damage is ridiculous. Again, look at this gameplay. Like I said before, it really just speaks for itself because goddamn, this build is so strong that it is 11:40 p.m. right now and I'm recording this video because I just had to show you guys this one. See you very soon for the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Appreciate you all. Peace.